Hello and welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to be talking about building an AI business. During this talk, I am going to be looking at a few observations that I've had based on my learnings over the years working in the industry, and put together a few tips and tricks that you can employ to build a successful AI business. Diving straight in, a little bit about me. I am the founder of Wave Digital, a company based out of Singapore, providing business strategy, technology consultancy for impact-driven companies. These are usually companies that are trying to solve one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we help them scale, become sustainable, and spread their impact around the world. Technology plays a big role in our ability to find these solutions. And we are working in the space of artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, as well as mixed reality. Currently, our clients are based across 5 different continents with focus on disability, healthcare, education, sustainable e-commerce, and elder care. Apart from this, I'm also a digital nomad, which means I travel and work about 6 months a year. And what this has done is actually provided me with a lot broader perspective in terms of the problems that people face around the world, and has helped me connect better with the solutions that we have been providing in terms of technology and how it fits into solving a global problem. Now, talking about the AI landscape, recently I was at the World Summit AI in Amsterdam, and what was very clear from the attendance as well as the startups that were exhibiting is that the overall AI ecosystem has matured. And there are a few reasons why. One of them is the ease of access to compute power, as well as the ease of access to data. There are quite easily available data sets today, which you can leverage on to build your models, which wasn't the case before. Based on cloud computing, you can quite easily get started with deploying said models and get started and build your product, which again was not the case before. So overall, what we can see is it's become a lot easier to get started in this space, and the barrier to entry has gone down significantly. So with the barrier to entry down, while there are a lot more startups coming in, so what is it that separates the successful startups from those that are lesser successful? So for that, I'm going to be looking over about 4 different points, or rather, I would say observations. The first and the foremost, the most important one, is defining the problem. Most successful startups begin here, where they are looking at what the problem is that they are trying to target and building solutions based on that in order to solve it. What we tend to do, especially people from technical backgrounds such as myself, we try to think solution first as opposed to problem first, where we fall in love with the idea of a particular solution, which may be based on AI or any other technology. And we want to figure out that once we build this solution, what problem it can actually solve. Whereas the problem itself should be the #1 starting point. Case in point from my own experience was when I was trying to build an intelligent learning management system based on what I thought was a key pressing issue, which was personalization of content, or being able to have virtual mentorships online, or being able to create and tailor content and events and career paths based on the learning abilities of students. But what, as it turned out, that was again a very solution-focused decision, whereas the actual problem in adoption of that product would come in the form of administrative cost of migration, especially systems which have been around for almost tens of years, as well as training costs and maintenance costs. Who is going to be responsible for this? How much of training is it going to take, both from the IT teams as well as from the professors who now need to create content for this new platform? So overall, it wasn't an easy enough process for those who were going to pay for it and wasn't actually solving a real problem. So now that we have realized that the problem is defining the problem is important, so how do you go about doing that? So there are a couple of ways to think about it, starting with you yourself, where your own observations, whether that is based on your own daily life, things that you observe there, or based on conversations that you may have had with people and the problems that they have faced in specific areas. If this doesn't work out, then there's always social media platforms, whether that's Reddit or Facebook, where you can pretty much go into multiple different groups and find out what are the issues that people are facing. To be fair, finding a problem in today's world is actually not as difficult as you would think, because there are a lot of places and a lot of things that people struggle with. What is important, however, and what should be the result of this process, should be you identifying a problem that you are passionate about from this whole list of different problems that people are facing. The reason behind doing this is because building a startup is not a very straightforward process. There are going to be ups and downs, there are going to be problems, there's going to be challenges, and unless you're passionate about the problem itself and therefore the solution that you're providing for that problem, it is going to be very, very difficult to keep going forward in the face of adversity. So stage one, define the problem, result of that stage, find out a problem that you're passionate about. Once you've done that, the next step is going to be doing your market research. At this stage, what you could start with is creating some sort of a solution hypothesis, which is an initial idea about what your solution is going to be all about. After this, once you've done this, you start looking at an outline of a business plan, which is going to be the result of this overall stage. Where I think in a lot of cases with business plans, people can go overboard with pages after pages. It doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated at this early stage. What it should be looking to do would be answering a few key questions, such as, who are you selling to? Here is where you try to define the demographic of people, the geographic location, what age group we are talking about, what gender, if applicable. So that's what you're trying to identify. Plus, then you look at what are the competing products that are out there for that particular target audience. Once you've done that, how will your audience buy or consume your product? What are the platforms that you're going to be targeting? What are the channels, what are your distribution channels for this particular product? Then what is the cost of making this product? This could be cost of building the product. This could be cost of maintaining it, cost of deploying it. So what are the different costs? Cost of hiring people, perhaps, for your team to be able to build the product with the right expertise. Marketing costs, followed by how will you be making money? So this is essentially a business model where you're trying to figure out what are your revenue streams. Is it going to be free initially? Are you going to have paid services? What is it? What kind of model is going to help you make your money? So having an outline of a business plan with answering these questions goes a very long way in understanding what market you are tailoring to and the next few steps about revenue. On to the third part, which is now talking about validation of the idea. Now that you've got identified a problem and you have an outline of a business plan, it's important to start validating the idea. This can be done in a few different ways, again, where you can be conducting in-person interviews or interviews over a call. Here you can be looking at asking different questions to your target audience and figuring out whether the idea that you had as a solution works to solve their problem, and more importantly, in some cases, whether they are willing to pay for it or not. The other way of doing it, if this is not the case, then quickly create a landing page where you're describing the product and see how many people are actually interested by asking them to sign up for updates. Creating landing pages these days is actually quite a straightforward business, because you could be using systems like Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, or Lead Pages to easily get a landing page up and running and get your leads and signups. The third and the more formal way of doing this is something called empathy mapping, where you're literally trying to walk in the shoes of your target audience and figuring out what is the pain point and how your solution is trying to solve that. This step 3, kind of acts as a checkpoint as well, where you're trying to figure out at this point whether you should proceed to the next stage, which is the development of the product, or whether you don't have enough to go forward. So if you do not have enough, then ideally you go back and relook your business process or the problem that you're trying to solve, see if there is a narrower version of it that you want to tackle. Or if you are ready to proceed to the next stage, then we go on to product development. There are various ways of doing product development. Again, I think the most popular one at this stage is agile development, which tends to look at four different aspects, which is ideation, which starts with understanding the user experience, the user journeys, potential designs that you're going to be looking at, followed by creation, which is the actual build of the product, followed by validation, which is testing, getting feedback with real users, and finally iterating based on the feedback that you've got and going through the process all over again. It's highly unlikely that your very first version tends to be the final version. So people tend to have multiple releases of products where you have alpha, beta, and possibly final. And even after the final, you have multiple rounds of iterations on top of that. So the key thing to understand here is, even though we are building an AI-based business, the core principles of running the business still pretty much stays the same, where you still need to have great design, you still need to have great user experience to make people actually care for the product and make people actually use the product. Going into a few more specifics, though, now we are talking about things that are specific to AI-based products or AI-based businesses. There are three main aspects that you need to take into consideration. First is data. I think you might have heard about this from any and all experts, that data is one of the biggest things that you need before you can even consider having an AI startup. When they talk about this, so volume is obviously important, the volume of data, but that alone is not sufficient, because you need to think about the cleanliness of data, how structured your data is, how labeled your data is. Because at the end of the day, this is the data that forms the input into your AI or ML model, which would then produce the results or output, which is going to form your product. So if you're putting in data which is pretty much garbage, you're pretty much going to get garbage out, which is a garbage in, garbage out principle. Finally, next step is going to be looking at models. So here again, this is not talking about all of the possibilities, but most companies look at it from the perspective of whether you're trying to achieve predictive model or whether you're trying to achieve a classification. So depending on that, you need to choose the right model that works for you. And the final step is actually maintenance, where once you've got your data, once you've got your model and it's been predicting, it's been providing you results, you need to figure out what is the next step of it, because this is not a one-time process where you're going to be getting more and more data coming in. How are you going to be handling data storage? What is the data architecture that's going to help with this? Then once you get better feedback, once your product has gone through a few cycles of feedback, whether your model itself needs to be tweaked, whether it needs to be updated based on changing business requirements, perhaps. All in all, the idea here is to keep improving and updating the systems so that you can create a better product. So that's the cycle of your product development. And this is pretty much the gist of it. Apart from that, there are a couple of other obvious business things that you need to think about, which is A, the kind of team that you have. At an early stage, the team composition tends to be about co-founders with complementing skill sets. And this is where I have to absolutely implore, and I've seen this happening one too many times, which is if you're building an AI-based product, you need to have someone in your team who understands AI from a technical perspective. If you're building technical products, you should need to have a technical person in your team. No matter how experienced you may be in the field, this is absolutely crucial because it's important to identify possible pitfalls, possible architectures right up front, as opposed to trying to hire a possible CTO or technical director much further in the life cycle of your product, at which point you may have to go back a lot of different steps to be able to build something that is actually usable. Next is capital requirements. So at some point of time, depending on the kind of startup that you are, kind of business that you are, or what stage of business you are, you may have to raise capital. In most cases, AI-driven companies, the overall capital expense upfront has reduced significantly, unless you are more hardware-driven, like in the fields of robotics. But otherwise, as we mentioned before, the barrier to entry at this stage with capital is not that high anymore. And the final part, obviously, is going to be around marketing and sales, where we are talking about how you promote your product, how you reach out to your audience, and what different channels are you going to be looking at in terms of selling it. There is one key thing that you might have noticed that I haven't actually touched upon, which is about knowledge and education of AI. And the reason for this is there are usually two camps here when it comes to where you should get started and when you should be acquiring the knowledge of AI. Whether you should do that right at the beginning before you even start considering building a business around AI, or should it be more focused around the problem that you've identified and therefore have a much more targeted learning and knowledge of AI? I personally feel like there is a case for both, and you should ideally start at a point where you have a basic understanding of what AI is capable of doing, what is possible, what your options are, especially in the fields of computer vision, perhaps, or natural language processing or machine learning. What is possible? What are your options? And then once you've identified your problem and defined the problem that your business is trying to solve, that's when you dive deep into the actual solution, depending on what knowledge your business needs. So at the end of the day, what you need to do is to understand what is possible and then try and contextualize it to the problem that you're trying to solve. That's about it. I think as a final thing, which would help a lot of people, is in terms of the resources that are available. There are loads of resources available. This is, as I said, a maturing ecosystem now. And these are certain things that I've actually used and found quite valuable. Starting with just general learning of artificial intelligence. Platforms like Udacity, I think this is probably my favorite one at this point, is a good place to get started, followed by LinkedIn Learning, which is pretty much a hash of lynda.com, or the very, very popular, almost gospel-like deep learning AI, which is by Andrew Wang. And this is pretty much something that everyone tends to go for. Apart from just the learning bits, there are a few quick starts depending on what kind of business that you're trying to run. So in the field of chatbots, there is Dialogflow, Chatfuel, Amazon Lex, and Azure Bot Service. With hosting, you have the major cloud computing services, computer vision and NLP as well. There are different APIs that are available. All in all, these tend to help you get started very, very quickly, as opposed to trying to come up with your own algorithms to build very, very complex models yourself. But these are essentially software as a service that you can leverage on straight off. And depending on your data that you want to use to train, build out products very, very quickly. Then in terms of development, TensorFlow continues to be one of the top tools that developers use to build out machine learning models. Then the final part, the machine learning pipelines. So these are things that actually help you get started really quickly to manage and deploy machine learning algorithms. Kubeflow is one of them, and AutoML is another one, where it helps you understand better what kind of models would be perfect for the problem that you're trying to solve, and helps you identify and deploy those. So with that, I think what you might have noticed during this entire talk is that I haven't gone very, very in depth in terms of artificial intelligence and focus purely on AI-based products, because at the end of the day, this is still a business, and most of the principles that work for successful businesses in general also apply for AI-based businesses, which is why there are a couple of things which are obviously different when it comes to data and models. But beyond that, most of the things like user experience, customer journey, all of that pretty much stays the same. And you should be focusing on it from a much more holistic, problem-based, problem-driven focus, as opposed to a solution-based focus. So I hope you found this talk valuable. I hope you got something to learn from it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm available over email as well as LinkedIn. And that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a good day.